Hi there, and welcome to this tutorial. For those of you who are like me, who think Reaper is the best digital audio workstation that exists, today I want to share with you 10 tips to make editing and using Reaper really fast. These are simple things, but they're things that I use literally every single time I'm in a Reaper project doing editing or mixing or whatever. First up, I want to start with some really basic navigation stuff that I think a lot of people don't really understand when they first use Reaper. So if you're like me and you're a Windows user using a standard scroll mouse, there's a couple of important sort of behavioral things that Reaper does that might not seem obvious at first. So let's start with the fact that using the scroll wheel will zoom in and out of your project around wherever the playhead is. So as you can see, wherever I put the playhead, that's what I zoom in on. If I place my cursor over the tracks and I use the wheel mouse, I can scroll up and down through the project. If I hold down Control while doing that, I can expand and contract the tracks. Tip number 2, basic play behavior and how the playhead relates to what you're seeing in the Reaper viewport. Now it's important to know that clicking on waveform region versus in between them or just above has a different effect while the track is playing. It'll always follow the playhead unless I click somewhere else while it's playing. But if I do that, I've got to make sure I click on a region because otherwise it'll just start playing from wherever I click. Here's what I mean. This is an important one because it can stop you from getting confused about where you are in your project. Another quick play behavior bonus tip is that there's a difference between hitting the spacebar and hitting the enter key. Spacebar will start playing and always return to the start position. Whereas hitting the enter key is more like a play pause type deal. Alright, tip number 3, showing the mixing console and making fine-tune adjustments. To get the most screen real estate, I usually hide the mixing console and use the shortcut Control-M, M for Mary, to show and hide the mixing control. That way I can quickly flick between them. Now if I want to make a very fine-tune adjustment to any volume or pan, all I need to do is hold down the Control key while dragging the handle. You'll notice when you do this that the handle moves a lot more slowly than if you were to just grab it and drag it. I always have snap turned on by default, but what happens if I'm editing some vocals and I want to make some very fine adjustments to the regions? You'll notice that snap will move in pretty large time increments, but all I have to do is hold down Shift to bypass the snap. Alright, tip number 4, how to manipulate regions. There are simple ones like dragging the beginning or the end of a region. Also, I can add a fade by positioning the cursor at the top of the region. I can then right click on that fade to change the type. But then there are some more things we can do. For instance, if I hold down the Alt key, I can move the clip within the region that I can see. Notice how Reaper also gives you a preview of the waveform with the envelope applied. Furthermore, if I hold the Alt key but position my cursor on the end of the region, I can then stretch the visible region. Notice how it's snapping. If I then hold down the Shift key, I can make a fine-tune adjustment with that drag and stretch. When I place my cursor at the top, I can change the volume. Tip number 5, stretch markers. Stretch markers in Reaper are so ridiculously easy to use. I've watched over people's shoulders when they've done stretch markers and time stretching in other programs, and it looks painful. In Reaper, all you have to do is place your playhead where you want the marker and hit Shift W. You can then just add markers to your heart's content, noting that you want to have at least 3 to give yourself a boundary. For instance, I'll want to pin this clip at the start and at the end of where I want the edits to occur, and then I can move the regions in between. Noting that once again, because I've got snap on, I have to hold down Shift to make fine-tune adjustments. Tip number 6, Reaper's Invisible Box Select. The way you can select more than one region at a time in Reaper can be done a couple of different ways. The first one is by holding Control and manually selecting all of the different regions that you want. A cool feature of Reaper is that if you select one region and then you hold down Shift, the next place that you click will be the corner of an invisible box. See what I mean? Here. Holding Shift, click, invisible box select. This also goes for MIDI triggers. So if I click here and then hold Shift and click here, it basically selects everything in invisible box region between the 2 points where I clicked. Tip number 7, track grouping. I love track grouping. This project looks pretty messy because we rendered out a lot of the stems. But track grouping in Reaper lets you organize things really nicely. To group tracks, or essentially put tracks in a folder, all you need to do is click on this little folder icon on the bottom right hand side of the track header. When you click that, it cycles through grouping options. To then tell Reaper which track is the last track in that folder, just do the same thing on the last track in that group. Then, to expand and contract that group, you'll be given this little arrow icon at the top right of that group, and you can then click that to either collapse or expand that group. Tip number 8, copying and pasting plugins. I love that in Reaper that if you've been working with a plugin that you've managed to fuss with for a long time and you've got the setting just the way you want it, you can basically just select that in the list of FX in the plugin list, hit Control C to copy, and then you can just drop that into the list of any other track. You can paste it and it will paste in with all of the exact settings of the track that you took it from. Tip number 9, take management and cropping takes. If you are like me and you really like Reaper's take management, here's a couple of tips. First of all, it's really handy if you want to keep all your takes nice and clean to use the record mode time selection auto punch enabled. What that means is that you'll then be able to select a time region, and every time you go to record on that track, it will always record directly over the existing takes and add that into the stack. Without auto punch enabled, you'll end up with really messy looking kind of like weird groups of takes and things that look like this and that don't edit easily because it's really hard to see where one stops and the next one begins. Once you've auditioned all your takes and you've decided which one you want to keep, all you need to do is right click on that take, go to your take options menu and go crop to active take, or hit Alt Shift T. That way it makes that take the focus and it gets rid of all of the other garbage. Tip number 10, showing and hiding trim envelopes. If you're like me and you've got heaps and heaps of tracks and pretty much every single one of those has some sort of automation, whether it's volume or panning, in Reaper you can simply select all of those tracks and hit V to either show or hide your volume envelopes, or P to show and hide the pan envelopes. It's just that simple. Alright, here's bonus tip number 11, and I think this is my favorite. When you're going through and automating the volume of each of your tracks, it can be really annoying to sit there and try and draw them in with most of the default tools that you're presented with when editing your volume envelope. However, if you create a time selection for the region that you want to either increase or decrease in volume, once you're then looking at the envelope trim, you can then hold Control and Shift, and it will move that whole region up and down nice and cleanly. Once you've then raised that section, you'll be able to just put it up and down as you wish without having to modify any of the volume points that can get really messy. And one last final extra tip is that if you just want to get rid of your time selection region, all you have to hit is Escape. Thanks for watching. I hope this makes your time editing in Reaper a little bit quicker and more efficient.